live today, talking NFL, doing our normal Twitter Tuesday live episode that we like to do, getting back to it. We've got some good questions about coaching, staff changes, who's going to benefit in the long term from new cultures with their franchise, and maybe some more summer trades to come before camp. All that and more coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
You're listening to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, your daily podcast on the National Football League, powered by the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock and Matt Williamson with you at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Some of those questions from today's show will come from those Twitter handles. You can at us anytime throughout the week if you want to holler, or hit us on the YouTube comments. Locked On NFL channel is where we are located on the daily. And of course, we'll jump into the live chat. If you got any questions, you want to say hi, hit us there in the live chat as we go along today. Thanks for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Matt, got a good question earlier on in the week that I want to start with to kick things off here. And we will get into some trades and, maybe is Jimmy G on the move? You mentioned Diontae Johnson from your Steelers. Maybe a little role play on what some of those trades might look like. And we can bounce some ideas off of each other if those trades could actually be in the cards and what those returns might be if those players are traded. But first, I want to get into some coaching changes around the league. And
before you do, I've been meaning to. I wanted to make sure I should have told you this off the air, but I just wanted to throw this out there. After we went off the air yesterday, it was announced that Matthew Berry is leaving ESPN, and big deal. I see your mouth agape over there. So is that the first you've heard of it?
I did not hear that.
Okay, it was late afternoon, and he announced that he is leaving ESPN. On good terms, all those good things. And I listened to his farewell podcast as I was taking my daughter and her friend to the local Kennywood, the local amusement park and all that stuff. And it just kind of rung home to me because I remember doing my farewell pod. Not that I was ever at the level of popularity of Matthew Berry, but 12 years ago, my Football Today farewell pod, kind of almost crying on the air and how much fun it's been. And they've been successful. It started the same time my ESPN pod was started, and they've kept trucking along and just blown things out. And I consider Matthew a friend, and I'm sure he'll do awesome no matter where he is. But he's had a massive influence on not only the fantasy world, but the whole football world.
Yeah, one of the first big fantasy personalities.
Yeah.
And as far as I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, Matthew Berry was sort of trying to go the become an actor, like a true actor, right? At some point in his career before he started doing the fantasy stuff. And that's why he's just naturally good on camera and has this charisma. Am I wrong on that? And I know he did do some minor acting roles.
I'm not certain about that. He has been in a few things since he's gotten super popular. And I didn't realize this. He was an intern for George Carlin, right out of college, so how awesome would that be? I mean, just hang around with George Carlin and tour with him. That would be a little
awesome.
Bit. Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah. You'd see everything. Yeah.
Maybe he was a writer. Maybe he
was a writer for, what's the Married to Children. He was he did some episodes of Married to Children.
He was a screenwriter then, maybe not the actor part that I was thinking of for him. But whenever he lets everybody know what his new gig is, we should have him on to publicize it.
Absolutely.
And chat about the old podcast days.
Yeah. And I just want to throw that out there, and I have great respect for him and his work. And one just quick story. I remember it was like my, fourth year at ESPN, something like that. And I remember, his podcast was starting to kick off, and there was more and more fantasy content on ESPN. And I went to the editors. I'm like, hey, I have a dynasty and a big fantasy background. You want me to do an article a week for fantasy? And I've told the story before, but they basically told me, Williamson, you were a scout in the league. That's beneath you. Don't do that. Fantasy's never going to be that big. I'm like, okay, no problem. But Matthew changed that.
Turned out to be pretty big.
Yeah, pretty big.
Canuck says, jump on to say thanks for your pod. One of my favorites. We appreciate you. Jason says, first time watching, always listen to the pod. All right.
Nice.
We got to grow the YouTube channel thing, and it is fun to do the live occasionally. Mark says you guys rock. Keep it up. So appreciate everybody
right.
on the live chat and hanging out. A little bit of breaking news here from from Field Yates as we go live was Panthers GM Scott Fitterer said on Baker Mayfield whether he is the starting quarterback, quote, "This is an open competition." What do you think?
Okay.
It kind of does it kind of have to be, even though we all know who's going to win that open competition? Does he have to see that? Does it have to start that way because of this team that already had a rapport going and everyone else has been in OTAs? A guy just gets dropped in July and is the new starter. You kind of have to compete a little bit, but I have a feeling it'll take about a week to figure that out.
I think so too. I mean, I think it's wink, wink. We have a contest here. Now, I used to be a Sam Darnold apologist. I can't be anymore. But his situations were awful in New York and nearly as bad behind that Carolina offensive line. Maybe he's going to be a little better, Baker aside. Maybe. I've given this some thought since Friday, and we talked wide receivers yesterday, so we didn't go down this road. But a couple things stand out to me is I thought maybe Darnold would then get traded to Tampa or Kansas City or Buffalo or something like that. But the more I thought about it, if I'm the Panthers, I'd have to eat the majority of his contract, don't you think? I mean, at least as much as Cleveland did.
More than Cleveland, probably, yeah.
And I'm going to get a lesser pick than I gave up for Mayfield. So for a 6th or 7th round pick and saving $3 million in cap space or $1 million in cap space, why not hold on to the guy? It's not. I mean, you're just not getting anything in return.
You have a good backup. Iron sharpens iron. At least you make Baker Mayfield win the job. Maybe Darnold turns out to be better. Maybe it makes Darnold better. Maybe it makes both of them better to have that competition. Maybe Darnold plays well enough, or even just doesn't have to play that well, but signs a contract in the offseason. You get a 6th round comp pick anyway. So
exactly.
what are you really gaining?
Exactly. And a couple other things of note in that situation is I didn't realize this. It's not, it doesn't affect his play on the field, but he's wildly popular in a Garoppolo type of way. Like he's a positive influence on the team in the locker room. They want him around as opposed to, you got to get this guy out of here. That's not the situation at all. And I also think it's telling Mayfield didn't have to give up that $3.5 million in his pocket. And he did. I assume he thinks he's going to be the starter.
Yes, and at least betting on himself to earn that $3.5 million back. And then whatever, comes next offseason. I wonder if there was, and I don't even know if this is legal to do, but could Baker Mayfield have said, look, I'll take this pay cut, but you can't franchise tag me? Because that would make a lot of sense, because then you'd be making yourself future money and not allowing this team that just traded for you and you took a pay cut to go there to be the starter for 1 year to hold that over your head and then franchise tag you, and then you're not a free agent like you want to be the next offseason. I wonder if that's a possibility. I wonder if that's something that Jimmy G could do as well if he ends up on the trade market.
Right. I mean, if a new team were to franchise Baker or Jimmy wherever he lands, well, that means he had a good year. I mean, he wasn't a flop. The team won some games. They're not picking in the top 5 and looking at Bryce Young or CJ Stroud or whatever. So your stock went up, if that's even on the table. I wish I knew that legally. I mean, I bet you can't put that in a contract, but maybe you could shake the GM's hand or owner's hand and say, hey, I'm making a deal that's good for both sides. Don't franchise me, all right? I'm like, okay, that's cool. I don't know if that's legal or not. I really don't.
Yeah, even if it's not part of the CBA, at least a wink handshake deal or something like that. Jason asks, is Baker supposed to be ready by the start of the season? Did he have shoulder surgery? He did have shoulder surgery. It was to his non-throwing shoulder. By all reports, I thought he was going to be cleared and ready to go and already throwing, but I don't know. I haven't really seen any reports on that, but I think the timeline was that he's going to be 100% before camp. And again, it's not a throwing shoulder. So let's see.
I was hoping you'd know that answer, because I've seen nothing about him being even in doubt, because he had several injuries since the shoulder, which happened week 2 or 3. It was his left shoulder. But it certainly bothered him. I mean, I heard reports like he couldn't sleep, and it would really hinder your career and your season. But I've heard nothing of the sort that they expect him not to be ready.
A great quote here from Baker Mayfield talking about the opener, because the Panthers and Browns play each other week 1, September 11. And Baker Mayfield's quote on that was, "I'm not going to sit here and be a robot and tell you that's not one I've marked on the calendar already. One, that's not who I am. To me, it's about winning games. Whoever we have marked on the schedule, I'm going to try to win. Obviously, this one is a little bit more history and personal meaning, but for me, it's about winning and setting the tone for the rest of the year. And however I can help this team do that, I'm going to do it. So it sounds like he's going to be playing in week 1. And I haven't heard anything that there's anything going on with his shoulder that will keep him out at all. So
I think the only thing that keep him out is if he can't win the starting job in a 6-week stretch. He's getting to the game pretty late.
And I think, that's the biggest part of it is you can't have your starting quarterback taking the first team reps on the first day of camp, not know where to go to the football and not really have a really
don't know the protections or,
that's really hard for him. So that might take a couple of weeks. So maybe they throw Sam Darnold out there in the first preseason game, and then they give Mayfield a shot. And, so he has full, 6 weeks, a month to really start to get things down.
Mm-hmm. This is an angle that fans don't think about a lot, but coaches very much do. And then in turn, front offices do. And Williamson will always bring back the Steelers. But divvying out practice reps and preseason reps for your quarterback, you better have a pretty distinct plan. And I bring up the Steelers because Mason Rudolph's going to get some snaps. They're going to get Trubisky ready for week 1 as the starter, but use the first-round pick on Kenny Pickett. And I hate to bring this up, you planned on having Dwayne Haskins too, and Carolina is similar all of a sudden. You want Matt Corral to get a lot of preseason work and practice work, but Darnold, as it stands right now, wink, wink, is your starter. If you play the game today, he's your week 1 guy. So he needs some time with the ones. But you better get Baker ready kind of in a Trubisky manner, but you have less time to do it. So there's a lot less practice time and preseason game reps than people realize. And you don't want to throw Baker out there behind the third offensive line in the fourth quarter of week 2 in the preseason. So you really need to figure out where these guys get their reps. It's hard to do.
And they did just waive whoever their other last camp arm was. The quarterback.
Was it PJ Walker?
No, it was.
But he's there still. He should go to the Niners.
They still have 4 now because they had 5 for a bit, and it was someone I think from Elon College.
Okay.
It was college undrafted free agent. So
but PJ Walker's probably not going to make the team either, and he's not a nobody.
No, and so it's funny because you need a camp arm so the guys don't throw too much and hurt their arms.
Mm-hmm.
You need a lot of guys to get a lot of reps, especially on that roster right now with Mayfield learning the system, and you got a rookie quarterback that's trying to learn the system, and you got to get him ready and find out what he is for your plan next year.
Yeah, it's hard on the quarterback coach, but it's harder on the head coach to say, man, I'm sorry, Sam, but you got to run with the 3s today, or you're the one today, or there's only 3 preseason games. How are we going to figure this out? And again, those fourth quarter reps aren't that valuable.
So let's flip the order here, and we'll talk about the coaching changes last, and let's continue our conversation about trades. And we just talked about the Baker Mayfield trade that did happen, a couple of trades that maybe could happen throughout the summer with Jimmy Garoppolo and Diontae Johnson. We have a lot of knowledge about those 2 teams. We've had some questions about those 2 players, and we'll get into that next, and we'll talk about which teams help themselves the most changing culture with their new coaching staffs this offseason going into 2022. But we got to let the folks out there know about BetOnline. You want to bet on Baker Mayfield and those Panthers? You can do it at least in week 1. It's going to be a huge matchup in week 1, and they've already got the odds all the way through week 18 for a lot of games. At BetOnline, your number 1 source for all your betting needs and sports information. You can even bet on exact Super Bowl matchups. If you think it's going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers against the San Francisco 49ers, you can bet on that exact Super Bowl matchup at BetOnline. Tons of props and odds for the 2022 season. Latest sports developments, league reviews, Major League Baseball all summer long. We've got boxing, MMA, golf, live betting, esports scores, and even Vegas casino games as well. So go lay down a bet and then play some poker or blackjack while you wait for that game to end and see if you won yourself a little bit of cash. Go to BetOnline right now, the fastest and easiest way to check all your favorite sports and events. Get to the website or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Thanks again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. A very special event going on the network starting July 18th. That is next Monday. Locked On gives you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at BetOnline. Available July 18th on the Locked On NFL channel, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube, which is the same place you find this podcast, Peacock and Williamson, on YouTube as well, the Locked On NFL channel. Okay. We had a question after yesterday's show because you dropped a little nugget there, Matt. And this is from Shantanu on Twitter. He says, Matt, you're killing me. How could you mention a Diontae Johnson trade rumor and not speculate on what the Steelers could get back? Could a mid-round pick in 2023 matter now? The Ravens got a first for Marquise Brown this year. I may be a homer, but I think DJ is better and will put up much better numbers with better quarterback play.
All right. First of all, you're not wrong about them getting a first for Marquise Brown, but they also had to throw a 3 in that deal. So it wasn't a 1 for Marquise straight up, but I see where you're going with this. And that was also on draft day, and trades happen a little different on draft day than they do in the offseason. I would argue that Diontae's worth more than Marquise, but they're not, light years apart. I said that because people have been asking me about this rumor speculation for a couple of days now. And the rumor is Dallas is interested in sending their second to the Steelers for Diontae next year. And to me, that's not enough from where the Steelers sit right now. Maybe at the trade deadline, if things have gone terribly wrong and he's not under contract, I would consider that. I rebutted it on Twitter saying, throw me Jalen Tolbert in a 2 and I'll think about it. And I get the impression the Steelers might be one of these teams that are more draft and then let receivers go on their way, Pickens and these guys, as opposed to making someone a $20 million man. I don't know that Diontae would be quite in that neighborhood, but he's really good. And I think he's going to be highly productive and will have a higher average depth of target, maybe a few fewer targets in general than Ben just getting it out of his hand, slant to Diontae over and over. But there's no merit behind this. This is just somebody threw it out there and people keep asking me about it. I don't know if there's any truth to the rumor.
It's interesting because I could see the Steelers being in a spot with Diontae Johnson where he's going to command more money than they would want to spend. They drafted 2 wide receivers this year. But it seems like something that would happen next offseason where they would let him go or, maybe
I would franchise him
for another year.
Right.
And
see where it goes.
And if he fights that, then maybe you can work out a tag and trade sort of a deal. So they still have some control contractually if they want to. But Diontae Johnson's a really good player, and it seems like if that was something they would have done, now's the worst time to do it from the Steelers.
Right, exactly.
It would have been a draft day trade, and they would have a different player already in house that they'd have gotten the picks for, and it would be, I'm sure there was enough teams willing to do some trades, and with everything that went down draft night, it seems like they would have gotten something already if that's what they wanted to do.
See, to me, this probably comes more from the Dallas side of things, and again, there might not be any validity to it. But if you're Dallas, it sounds like Gallup's not going to play until November, maybe late October at best. You have former Steeler James Washington. You have Tolbert. Even what's-his-face signed with Miami. It was their 3rd or 4th. Cedric Wilson. I've talked about Schultz in my tight end rankings. I don't think he's a featured player. And I love the Lamb situation, but they're kind of a receiver short right now, especially from where they've been.
I'm sure there's a price, for everybody in a certain way. But if the Cowboys were looking at their roster before camp and thinking, man, let's call the Steelers. Maybe they want to do something with Diontae Johnson and offer a second. The Steelers said no. Maybe that's where this is coming from. But
that might be it.
Right. The Cowboys exploring some options, and who knows? Wouldn't be shocked at all if the Cowboys did add a wide receiver before camp. But I would be a little bit surprised the timing of a Diontae Johnson trade right now.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the Steelers, who probably aren't a Super Bowl contender. But they're not blowing things up either. They're not a 3-win team. That's just not how they operate. I mean, they're not dumping everybody. There's no chance.
A lot of talk about a Jimmy G trade potentially happening. There was a report, multiple reports, Tom Pelissero and an ESPN report that that league executives expect a Jimmy Garoppolo trade at some point before the end of the month, and that shouldn't really be a shocking report. Having a hard time trying to figure out what he could get. Do you think the 49ers do you think the argument from the 49ers side is, look, we don't have to pay any money. That's on you and Jimmy if he wants to take a pay cut. But we want that, we want something that's better than a comp third that we could get if we carried him all year. And I don't think the 49ers are going to carry him all year. But do you think that's the asking price? Do you think it's better? What the 49ers could get back for Jimmy from Cleveland is better. They can get more than what Cleveland gave up. They got back Mayfield. So, if Cleveland calls and says, hey, we need you to eat $10.5 million, and here's a fifth that it could become a fourth, the 49ers are like, no, the cap space is more valuable than that fifth round pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a sticky part of it. I do think no matter what happens, and you threw this out there, and we've talked about it a couple times, it's going to be a conditional pick. We've seen that be a trend with Wentz and now Baker and all these guys where the future is uncertain. If you start X amount of games, or if the Browns go to the playoffs with or without you, this escalates to a higher pick. I don't know. Because what's hairy about the Browns situation is you don't have much draft capital over the next couple of years. I don't really want to lose a lot or substantial draft capital going from Baker to Jimmy. If that was an even wash, sure. But you're dealing with two different parties here. And if I'm the Niners, I want more than what you just got for Baker, for sure.
Right. Yeah. And the cap space is valuable. And so
it is.
If you're eating a lot, then you got to get something back. And the 49ers don't have the guarantees in Jimmy's contract like the Browns did. So I think the 49ers will argue they don't have to, pay anything. And maybe
but if they're only negotiating with one team, that's the problem.
Right. And but there's a report about maybe the Seahawks being interested, but I think still most likely it's a situation where Jimmy gets released and then someone signs him. I think it's probably the way things go, but I'm sure the agent would be involved either way. And maybe it's the same deal. It's just like, here's a later pick. You're going to get the same contract and take a pay cut that you would have gotten. The Niners get a little something, but don't have to pay any money. Then it starts to make a little bit more sense.
A lot of this has just been a game of chicken, that we only know there's a couple of suitors. There's only a couple quarterbacks. One domino fell with Carolina. And, I just said, if I'm the Niners, I want more from the Browns than they got from Mayfield. But if my options when it comes down to it are get a 6th-round pick or cut him, well, I'll take the 6th-round pick because he doesn't even factor in the comp game after you cut him.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if Jimmy would even show up to training camp at this point. I don't know if he wants to go through that. Although $25 million, depending on what the pay cut would be, maybe he is. Maybe he would be willing to go to camp if he was going to have to take, $6 million to be in a competition somewhere else. All right. Next, let's talk coaching changes. Which teams help themselves the most with those coaching changes, and any other questions that pop up in the chat. But first, I want to let the folks know about Rock Auto. Our friends at Rock Auto have helped me out so much, and I'm glad I learned about them because you save time and money when using Rock Auto. And you can do more repairs on your vehicle than you probably realize, even if you're not a car guy, as I am, as I learned recently. And you can save a ton of money because you're not paying someone else's labor, and you're definitely not paying the 50 to 100% markup for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership. For example, Honda Odyssey fuel pump, $353 from your local chain store. It's only $216 from rockauto.com. But even smaller part, you don't change a tail lamp or, motor oil. Or for me, I changed the fender flare, changed my wiper blades, new carpet for your interior. There's a lot of things you can do to fix up your vehicle yourself. And Rock Auto has been helping people do it as a family business for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices always reliably low for every customer. So go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. This question earlier on in the week on Twitter from Josh. And Josh says, what say you? Which teams improved most purely on coaching changes in 2022? And really, this goes beyond 2022 if you're talking about coaching changes. So here's the list of coaches from originally this question was posed from Warren Sharp, and Joshua Reddy wanted our opinion on it. In Chicago, Matt Nagy to Eberflus. In Denver, Fangio to Hackett. Houston, Coley to Lovie Smith. In Jacksonville, Urban Meyer to Doug Peterson. Las Vegas, Gruden to Josh McDaniels. In Miami, it was Flores to Mike McDaniel. No S on the McDaniel. S on the Josh McDaniels.
I screw that up a lot, by the way.
I screw that one up, too.
I avoid it. Sometimes I'll say the former Patriot offensive coordinator. That was kind of
yeah. In Minnesota, Mike Zimmer to O'Connell. In New Orleans, Sean Payton to Allen. In New York, Joe Judge to Brian Dable. And in Tampa Bay, Arians to Bowles. I'm gonna eliminate a few right away because going from Sean Payton to anybody can't be an improvement. You're hoping to stay the same, because you got the same defensive coordinator, same system. Arians to Bowles is, again, that what, and Arians is still in the building. I think that's not going to change a lot there. So I don't think that'll be the answer.
I think you have to lump Houston with that too, because you're bumping the defensive coordinator. There's not enough change to matter.
Right.
And it's not Belichick retiring, it's,
right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that one's going to change a ton. I think they're just going to be better because they're, starting to build the roster now.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're talking Denver, Fangio to Hackett. I have no idea what to think about Hackett. They're going to improve because of the quarterback they got, if anything, more so than the coach. But maybe, coach, quarterback, everything. I would assume the offense can be a lot better. I'd be worried if the defense takes a step back.
Yeah, I bet Vic would be like, I wouldn't have mind coaching Russell Wilson. You could have done that a year ago. I do think the defense goes backwards because I think he's an exceptional top 1% defensive mind type of guy. But the offense is definitely going to get better. And in the end, I think the team's in a better spot. But Fangio, Flores, Zimmer, Gruden, I believe all those guys, especially the last three I mentioned, are quality NFL head coaches. I don't know that the new guy's better. I mean, Gruden's won a lot of games this league. Zimmer's won a lot of games this league. Flores and Fangio, to me, are very impressive, especially defensive minds. So I appreciate the new hires, especially in Vegas and Miami, but I don't know that the new guy's better in that instance. I don't know that.
Canuck says the answer is the Dolphins. That's tough because,
they also have Tyreek Hill and Armstead, and I bet Flores would have liked those guys too,
Yeah. But actually he recants and says Jacksonville. Jacksonville's a big one because I want to look at culture, because culture is a big part of all this. I think things were bad in Chicago with Nagy, not necessarily negative culture like it was with Urban Meyer, but I just think it has a chance to be, you bring in a professional coach, and I don't know what Matt Eberflus is going to look like as a head coach, and their roster didn't really improve much over the course of the offseason, didn't have a first round pick, didn't help out their young quarterback on the offensive line or at wide receiver much. They did add some pieces in the draft, but didn't do much in free agency either. So I don't know if it's going to be in wins and losses now, but potentially going forward, if they change the culture, I think that could be big, and maybe bigger than we're expecting from a Bears roster that doesn't look great. But really, the Meyer to Peterson could be the biggest one on this list. Just changing the culture is so important for the Jags right now.
Right before we hit record, you mentioned that this was going to be a question. So I've been kind of kicking it around in my cranium as we've talked about other things. And the real answers to me are very much what you said. It's Jacksonville and the Giants. I mean, in the last 5 years, they're by far the losingest teams in the NFL. I mean, a 5-year stretch. It's been 4, and I think the Jags have one winning season in 14 years. And the Giants are pretty much going down that path post Eli, post, and that's a long time now. I put the Bears just outside that because I got no problem with Eberflus, but he just doesn't move the needle enough for me. I think the other two guys, Daboll and Peterson, again, I haven't seen Peterson or Daboll as a head coach, but I think those are improvements. Those are great hires, in my opinion. I think their rosters in New York and Jacksonville are better than when we saw them last. I'm not sure I can say that about the Bears. So I don't know that Eberflus is the answer. I think the other two guys are. You talked about, BetOnline. I put a little nugget on Jacksonville plus 700 to win the AFC South. Plus 700, that's pretty appealing. And I urge everyone to listen to the Jacksonville podcast we did last week too. It gives you a little glimmer of hope, and I hadn't seen it in that light before.
Yeah, it did give me a lot of hope talking to Tony Wiggins. It's Blocked on Jaguars. It's a good podcast, and there is some talent on the roster. And man, if you did get that superstar quarterback who's going into year 2, and we've seen guys win MVPs and go to the Super Bowl in year 2, right? Because when it happens fast for teams. I don't know if it's going to be that way for Jacksonville. Maybe it's another year before things really start rolling for them. But I got to put them number one just on culture alone, going from Meyer to a professional coach that's won before, has a ring in Doug Peterson. And then Daboll, I think, is right there too. Judge to Daboll, I think, is a big one. And then I'd probably put Nagy to Eberflus 3 on that list. And then some of them are just incomplete because we just don't know enough about the situations, and the situations before weren't that bad. Maybe Gruden, because Las Vegas, with everything they went through, just the headline.
Just a brutal year.
Josh McDaniels. And if McDaniels does, he's probably grown a lot as a coach since we last saw his weird sort of circus as like, flirting with head coaching jobs and then actually having a head coaching job for a short time. And, if he brings that Patriot way, but we've seen so many failed Patriots assistants trying to bring that Belichick style of coaching to a different team. It just hasn't worked that often. So I don't know what to expect there, but I'd put McDaniels just because of the culture and how things were weird and the Gruden firing and everything's been going on in Las Vegas for the last couple of years. I'd probably put them maybe fourth.
Yeah, I hear that, especially because last year was so bizarre. I mean, you throw in the rug stuff and things like that too. I mean, they've been an extreme organization since Al Davis started them, and last year was as weird a year in Raiders history as there ever was. But Josh McDaniels should be thrilled if whenever he hangs it up as a coach, he has as good a career as John Gruden did.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, that's not a bad coach.
That's true. That's very true. Last one, really quick here. This one from Viata on the chat. He says, with the cap expected to grow dramatically, does the cap really matter in the next year or two, Matt?
I mean, we've seen teams like the Saints circumvent it for some time now, and eventually you're going to have to pay the fiddler. I've tried to do more and more cap research and get more knowledgeable on it, but I look at it more from where would I spend my money? I mean, receivers are jumped up dramatically. Our safety's a bargain, things like that. Should I use a first-round pick on a guard if I can get a high-end one? It's, Laken Tomlinson for $8 million. Why would I use a first-round pick on that if I can't get a tackle for that price? I think it really matters. Yeah. I think it's always mattered less than some of us probably hint around. One of my favorite things is, as soon as the season ends, everyone goes to overthecap.com and be like, all these teams are minus 50 million under the cap. And well, they knew it was coming. I mean, it's not as big an obstacle as us fans think. You know what I mean?
It's funny because there was remember the cap hell era? There were some teams in the early 2000s that couldn't figure out the cap and would have to just cut everybody, can barely put together a roster.
Right.
Teams are a lot better now at maneuvering those numbers and have a lot smarter people. That are controlling the cap numbers in the cap game, and it's not as big of a deal. And with it growing, it's going to help. But they're also they know it's coming. We saw a lot of teams give out really big contracts to positions maybe don't always get paid a lot. So if you're going to start paying safeties a whole bunch and tight ends a whole bunch and wide receivers a whole bunch, it's not like defensive ends and offensive tackles and quarterbacks are going to start getting paid less either. So like the stars are getting paid a lot too. So it's going to go up along with the cap. So it'll always matter a little bit, but probably less than we all expect. And the fact that it goes up is going to help obviously relieve those. And I think the worst we've seen was, after the COVID year with the cap not going up, and it didn't even hurt that much then. So it's probably not going to be a problem for most teams. You want to collect talent, worry about how much they're making later.
Yeah. That was the one thing I was going to throw out is, assuming these capologists and front office people are close to seeing where the cap's going year after year after year, and it doesn't take another step back, I'm not going to fight you that the COVID thing didn't affect things. As fans, we didn't see the difference, but a lot of teams were unable to make moves that they had planned on 2 years in advance. I mean, The cap's almost like a chess game. Like, I'm going to get my pawns out there, and I'm going to get my, 2 years down the road, I'm going to get this rook down in whatever. I don't know how to play chess, but and all of a sudden somebody comes and steps on the chessboard. We need to, as long as there's no other speed bumps.
In the end, it was the players that still, got hurt more than the teams, because there was a bunch of guys that signed those 1-year deals that they probably would have gotten multi-year deals. And some of those guys had to go through a season of 1-year deal. Then they got paid this offseason instead. Mm-hmm. So,
the teams are never going to get hurt.
It's always going to get passed down to the players in a certain way. So the cap goes up, players make more, teams stay the same, I think is pretty much what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. But I think it goes up dramatically in the next couple of years too. To the question's point, I mean, teams are going to have a lot of freedom.
A lot of freedom, a lot of different ways to build rosters. And we've already seen right now that we've hit the era of maybe it's better to pay star players than to try to just slow rebuild, because that's difficult. A lot of things got to go right, and you got to hit on a lot of things. But at the same time, when you start paying your quarterback $40-50 million, you got to lose players like Tyreek Hill too. So there's some reality to the cap.
Oh yeah, there is.
All right, fantastic stuff. Thanks everybody who jumped on with us live. We'll be trying to do that on Tuesdays as we get ready for camp, but we've got some vacations coming, and we got some odd scheduling as well. But it's always a lot of fun to jump on live and chat with you. Matt and I will keep it going daily here, back tomorrow. Peacock and Williamson.